everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to this session at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm Philippa Strum. I'm the director of the Division of U.S. Studies here at the center. I'm very pleased to see some well-known faces here. For those of you who are newer to the center and for those of you who may be watching, let me explain that the Wilson Center was established by Congress in 1968 as the living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson remains the only president of the United States to have earned a PhD. And so what the center does in his memory is bring together people from the world of politics and people from the world of scholarship to talk about matters of concern to both. Certainly, one of the groups that is important in policymaking in the United States is the justices of the Supreme Court. And so we are going to be looking at that particular institution of policymaking today through the eyes of three very distinguished scholars. I'll introduce each of them and then we will turn the microphone over to them so that I don't have to keep interrupting the flow. Those of you who are in the room have small biographies of them, and so I'll just introduce them by minimally, as it were. They are very distinguished, and I'm not going to give you a whole story about their career. Our main speaker, Tinsley Yarbrough, who is the author of this biography of Justice Souter, is Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professor of Political Science at East Carolina University in Greensville, North Carolina. Many of us know the other works that he has done on Supreme Court justices and judges who are not Supreme Court justices, like Judge Frank Johnson. And I think most of us feel that his biography is one of the biographies of a judge that we should all read. That he has, of course, written about Justice Hugo Black as well, both Justice Harlan's, and one of his books, John Marshall Harlan, Great Dissenter of the Warren Court, I'm intrigued to notice, had a Chinese edition published fairly recently, and I would really like to know more about how that went over and what the reviews were like.
Always put dissenter in the title, and it'll go over well in modern China.
Professor Yarbrough is now working on a biography of Justice Blackmun. When he finishes speaking, Professor Mark Tushnet will comment. Professor Tushnet is Cormac Waterhouse Professor of Constitutional Law at Georgetown University. He is a former Woodrow Wilson Fellow here at the center, and so we are delighted to welcome Mark back. He is the author of a very distinguished biography of Justice Thurgood Marshall, as well as a book some of you may have seen recently, A Court Divided, The Rehnquist Court and the Future of Constitutional Law, as well as a co-author of 4 case books. And on the subject of case books and textbooks, Professor Karen O'Connor, who is a professor of government and director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, is a specialist in American government and the Supreme Court, has written prodigiously on both subjects. She is the past president of the Southern Political Science Association and the Women's Caucus for Political Science, and the author of a textbook that has gone into multiple editions on American government. Right, with that, I'm delighted to turn the microphone over to Professor Yarbrough.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at the center this afternoon. I appreciate your taking time to come. Of course, the one person who would be least enthused about an event such as this and about my book would be David Hackett Souter. He's a very private person, to say the least. Souter and Justice Blackmun overlapped 4 terms at the Supreme Court, and I got a kick out of reading some of their correspondence in the Blackmun papers. Some of that brought out Souter's very quiet humor. One day, Blackmun mentioned to Souter in passing that he thought he had an ancestor who had been executed by the state of New Hampshire. Well, that was all the encouragement that Souter needed, very soon a report from the New Hampshire Attorney General's office appeared, and this report recorded 6 Blackmans in New Hampshire who had been executed by the state, including Jedediah the Butcher Blackman, who had decapitated several of his neighbors. And so in that correspondence, you see the humor of the person and how well he can relate to people. But also you see there just what a private person Justice Souter is. Blackman was very active in the summer Justice and Society seminars at the Aspen Institute, and he tried year after year to get Souter to come down and take part. He also tried to get him to accept invitations to speak in other places, and Souter gave first one excuse and then another excuse, and then finally he said, I'm afraid that the good Lord has given you the share of sociability that should have gone to me. He said, I could gladly go to my grave if I never had to give another lecture or attend another lecture. I just am not that kind of person. And so Blackman stopped attempting to draw his friend in. I, of course, when I got into this project, certainly found out that Justice Souter is a very private person. I expected that he would not want to cooperate with an interview, knowing something about him and that he is sitting on the current court. But not only that, but he, of course, offered no encouragement to others, and indeed preferred that others not cooperate. And I ultimately felt very fortunate, though also something like a tabloid reporter in my efforts, but I felt sort of fortunate to get a goodly number of interviews of people, friends, attorneys, others in New Hampshire to add color to the book. Even though Justice Souter is a very private person, and researching this biography was a difficult task, I enjoyed it, and certainly it confirmed some feelings that I had about the justice and some of the things that made me think of him as an interesting biographical subject. For one thing, of course, there was his eccentric personality. This is a person who it seems really indifferent to the kinds of trappings of life that most of us find so appealing. He still lives in the old, weird New Hampshire farmhouse that his mother inherited years ago. It looks like something out of a horror movie in terms of appearance at dusk. He's very reluctant to invest in material objects. He lives in the same apartment he got when he first came here. Friends have offered to try to get it fixed up for him, and he has kindly declined their offers. For years in New Hampshire, he was driving a very aged Chevrolet, and it finally was so rusty and so unsafe that his good friend, former Senator now Warren Rudman of New Hampshire, just insisted that he get another car, and he did, but he continued to use that Golf Volkswagen car year after year. And one day someone saw him driving into the parking garage of the court, and he was leaning back as though maybe he'd been involved in some sort of accident, had a back problem. But when asked, he simply said that the seat had sprung, and he wasn't about to invest in a new seat, and so he was riding back. He's also, of course, a very independent person, and I appreciated that in him as well. When the 9/11 disaster struck, some of his friends in Concord were having him out to lunch that day, and the wife of the friend, a law partner in the firm where he worked briefly when he returned to Concord after school, thought, well, he probably isn't going to come because of all the security efforts. And her husband said, don't worry, he'll be here.